I'm Dagna Simmons with the League of Women Voters. League of Women Voters of Sioux City is part of what is called the Upper Mississippi River Region Organization, which is an interleague organization made up of leagues from Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And we were contacted by that organization about the fact that Chris Jones over here was going to be speaking in Council Bluffs and Red Oak, I think is the next one, this weekend, and would we be able to host them this morning. So I appreciate you all coming. There will be time for brief discussion at the end of his presentation. The coordinator for this event that we've been working with is Chris Eisenhart, and he's from Dubuque, and he is the executive director of the Dubuque Area Land and Water Legacy, a community-based conservation organization focusing on education, advocacy, and coalition building with other environmental and conservation-minded organizations and individuals. He is also a former Iowa House of Representatives member. He was served there for 16 years, ending in 2024. And he served on different committees that had connections with environment and agriculture. He is also currently the author of a Substack blog called Iowa Public Policy Geek, and he has a small photography business called Awestruck Nature Photos. So, Chuck Eisenhart.
Thank you. I'm just going to kind of speak briefly to set the stage for why Chris Jones and I are tag teaming today. And I'll just mention, I got into the room a little late because as I was parking outside, 5 turkeys came up and 2 of the toms were displaying full display. Well, they were going after the females, but obviously trying to impress them. So I had to get my camera out. Hopefully they turned out. Appreciate the introduction. After leaving the legislature last year, during which time I became familiar with Chris Jones and his work, him and his team from the University of Iowa came down regularly and informed, or at least tried to inform the state legislature regarding the status of water quality and other environmental concerns in the state. And he continues to be active in his retirement. I'm going to remain active in my retirement. As Dagna mentioned, I'm from Dubuque. One of the reasons I wanted to come here is because I wanted to get lost in more than one city than my own. This is a beautiful campus run by the Franciscan Sisters of Dubuque, which I represented for over 16 years. But in attempting to maintain an involvement in environmental issues in the state and water quality in particular, the League of Women Voters in Dubuque is very active in that Upper Mississippi River Coalition that Dagna mentioned. But I'm also very aware that we have kind of a split personality as a state in terms of our watersheds. I'm in the Mississippi River, and that Mississippi River watershed is very different than the Missouri River watershed on the western side of the state, about 25–30% of the state. But if we're going to make progress on any issue in Iowa, we need to come together as a state. And so I'm kind of interested in hearing more about what's happening on the Missouri River side so that some of the folks on the Mississippi River side can learn from your experience and maybe start developing some relationships that we can marshal to create some better progress, faster progress at the state level. What can we do from the outside to make better progress in Des Moines or our county level, wherever it needs to be made. So I'm not going to speak long. I just want to bring your attention to a postcard that's up here, and I hope you take one with you. It has on the back the description that Dagna mentioned about our group. And it also has some QR codes that can take you to different places. Our Facebook page. We have a Habitat Fund. We have events where we raise money to invest in wildlife habitat projects in the Dubuque area, thinking that if anything that benefits wildlife habitat has all sorts of other positives in many other ways upstream from that particular goal, water quality being a major one. We also have a link how you can become an ally of the organization. You don't have to be a member, but But if you just want to get on our list to find out what we're doing, we call you an ally. There's a way to do that. And lastly, and I'm going to talk more about this later, I have one slide at the end of Chris's presentation. There's a QR code about that says Lobby Iowa. And we're going to talk about a very simple way that you in this room, as part of this group, League of Women Voters, Sierra Club, or others that you may be part of or want to start up, can start making an impact at the state level, because there's some very simple ways that not many people know about that you can lobby state legislators. So I'll be back later to talk a little bit more about that after Chris talks in more detail about why you might want to do that. So appreciate the welcome, and I'm looking forward to the presentation too. I always learn more every time.
Thank you. We reached out to the Northwest Iowa group of the Sierra Club to help with putting this presentation together. We partner with them quite often. There's kind of a crossover of membership between the two organizations, but I don't want to forget that they actually put more work into this than the League did at this time. So now I want to do a brief introduction of Chris Jones. He is retired from the University of Iowa, where he worked as a research engineer at the IIHR Hydroscience, and engineering, studying water quality and agriculture landscapes. Previous to that, he worked at the Des Moines Waterworks and the Iowa Soybean Association. His research and writing has been featured in the Des Moines Register, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Kansas City Star, and Civil Eats. He is also the author of 60 scientific journal articles, several book chapters, and the book, The Swine Republic Struggles with the Truth About Agriculture and Water Quality. And that book was selected by the Library of Congress as Iowa's representative at the 2024 National Book Festival. He also did an interview this week with Alejandro Perez from KWIT. And if you go to our League Facebook page, you'll have a link to that article, that interview. And I think it was well worth your time to listen to that too after you hear him in person today. So Chris Jones.
Yes, my name's Chris Jones. I came here from Iowa City last night and this morning. I live in Iowa City about half time. About the other half of the time I live in this place, which is about 1 mile from Iowa. It's in DeSoto, Wisconsin, across the river from Lansing, Iowa. And so I'm up there about half the time. I'm in Iowa City about half the time. I did a program in Iowa City yesterday. I did a program in Iowa City the day before. I speak to a lot of groups like this. I got my taxes completed last year. I drove 7,000 miles speaking to groups everywhere from Stevens Point, Wisconsin, down to Springfield, Missouri. And so I do this a lot, and so I'm going to go through these slides, and I don't know if I'll get through them all or not. As was mentioned, we have to get down to Council Bluffs to get another program. So anyway, yes, I'm the author of The Swine Republic, and then if you're interested in my writing, I'm still pretty active on Substack. My Substack is the same name, The Swine Republic, and so I don't paywall anything. If you don't want to pay to subscribe, you don't have to. You can check some of that stuff out. Some of it isn't terrible. So So I begin all my programs by talking about our geological past here in Iowa, because it's very important we understand that so we can understand the drivers of water quality in the present day. And the geological past here is one of glaciation. We think Iowa has had glaciers intrude into it 7 times in total, but 3 main events. The first one being what we call the pre-Illinoisan event, which covered pretty much all of Iowa, ended 500,000 years ago. Then the Illinoisan event, ice came into southeast Iowa there. That ended 130,000 years ago. And then the one we talk about the most is the Wisconsin Glacier, and ice was in Iowa very recently, only 10,000 years ago. And so that tongue of ice came down from the north and stopped where the state capitol building is now. And so how glaciers shaped Iowa affects our farming systems, affects how we try to do conservation, and it affects the water quality ultimately. So prior to European settlement, I think we all know this is what Iowa was. It was tall grass prairie and wetlands and oak savanna, and of course that stuff's pretty much all gone, right? And now we have crops, and so we have 70 to 80% of our land in crops. We have some pasture in southern Iowa. We still have a little bit of forest in northeast Iowa and south central Iowa, and then in the river bottoms. And the thing that really distinguishes Iowa from other states is almost all of our land is privately held. And so when we try to improve the environmental condition here, we're almost always having to work with private landowners. And so if they don't want to do something, they don't have to, right? And so this is a big obstacle to trying to improve the environmental condition here in Iowa. Prior to European settlement, we know that the prairie streams were shallow systems. They spilled out into the floodplain very regularly. We had perennial plants on the stream banks, sand and gravel in the substrate, and the water table was very close to the surface of the earth in Iowa. We know these were clear water systems. We know these prairie streams were clear water systems, and we had the clean water species, the smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish, and then the generalist species, the channel catfish. And then we got here and we plowed up the prairie, right? We overturned the prairie. Europeans got here about the same time as John Deere invented the steel plow. The other big thing we did is we drained it. And so, you know, if you have lived here all your life, it's maybe hard to understand how wet Iowa really is. And so the soils are what we call hydric soils. They hold on to water very tightly. And so for much of this to get farmed, we had to drain it. And so that meant putting in field tiles. And so especially where that Wisconsin glacier was. And so you see the guys there in the upper left, that's Boone County, putting in the old clay field tiles. They left gaps in between the sections so water could get in there and then drain out to these constructed ditches that were made with steam shovels. And so you can see that on the lower left. The trapezoidal ditches that we constructed, we made thousands of miles of those in Iowa. And so then on the right, that's how the landscape looks now. And so we've lowered the water table 4 feet, you know, all over Iowa to optimize conditions for corn and soybean production. And so we can imagine prior to settlement, the way a stream began would be a wetland sort of gently overflowing into a stream channel. And so all the wetlands are gone, we've drained it all. And so this is how our streams start now. And so this is the start of the Iowa River, in north central Iowa. The Iowa River flows through Iowa City. And so we have all these field tiles dumping into a common spot. And an important consideration here is that across Iowa, that initial drop from the tile to the start of the stream is about 3 feet. And so what we've done is we've energized our streams from the very beginning. We put 3 foot ahead on all our streams. And so these streams have energy right at the very beginning, all the way down to when they get to the Mississippi and Missouri. The other big thing that we did that's been particularly destructive is we've straightened our streams. And so this is Walnut Creek in the Neal Smith Wildlife Refuge in Jasper County. You can see the stream channel in 1930 in green. You can see the stream channel now in red. That stretch we've cut out 500 meters. We've shortened it by half. But the vertical drop from point A to point B is the same. And so what's that mean? That means that water is going faster, right? It's dropping the same vertical distance, but over half the lateral distance. And so what has happened is that's caused our streams to erode downward. And this is especially apparent in western Iowa. And so we've straightened our streams. We know, in the Floyd, we see that, right? It's as straight as an arrow. We've done that all over Iowa, thousands and thousands of miles. And when we straightened them, we took the spoils and we used that for levees to keep the water out of the farm fields. And so these streams have eroded downward, and so now they're all down in these canyons, right? And so most of our streams now are are in this stage 4 of degradation there on that chart. And so this is Walnut Creek in Jasper County. And so this is no kidding. That stream can go from the top photo to the bottom photo and back to the top photo in 24 hours. And so we get a 1-inch rain here and our streams just go bonkers, right? Well, that was, that's not the natural thing to happen. And so they're so flashy. And it's because we've straightened them. We've removed all the perennial vegetation on the landscape that provides surface area for the raindrops to adhere to. And then the perennial vegetation also disperses the energy of the falling raindrops. All that's gone, and so now our streams are real flashy. About the first 6 feet of that material in the top photo has all been deposited since settlement. Okay, that's all eroded from the uplands, and since it's only been there for a century, we call that unconsolidated. It's very vulnerable. When the stream comes up, the stream can access it and scour it away very easily. And so as a consequence, our streams are always muddy. Okay? And so this hydrological modification that we've done across the landscape is as much responsible for the degradation of our water quality as the chemicals and everything else. And so here's another image. We can see this is western Iowa. You can see the old stream meander there, and you can see how that stream has so aggressively eroded the stream channel in this particular watershed. Another contributing factor here is the straightening of the Missouri River. And so we've cut out hundreds of miles from the Missouri River to have navigation up to Sioux City, which hardly ever gets used. And this picture here is Mills County. On the far left is 1923, the middle 1947, and 1976. And so the Missouri has also eroded down here, right? And so Missouri used to go at 3 miles an hour. Now it goes at 6 miles an hour. It's got more energy. It erodes downward. Well, the Missouri is naturally a muddy water system, right? They didn't call it the muddy Missouri for nothing. And so prior to settlement, the Missouri would meander back and forth across the floodplain, right? And scour out that easily erodible lush soil and take it down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so here we see the sediment transport in the Mississippi Basin in 1800 on the left there, a huge amount coming from the Missouri, a tiny amount coming from the upper Mississippi and the Ohio. Then we go to 1980, you can see we've cut off all the sediment from the Missouri by channelizing it. And then we've increased by a large amount the sediment loading on the upper Mississippi and the Ohio. And so we hear a lot about the wetlands eroding down in Louisiana, right? Well, that's because we have altered the hydrology of the Missouri River up here so we could farm the floodplain and have a shipping channel that nobody uses. And I always say the Missouri River is the biggest environmental disaster in this country's history, in my opinion. And so what we've done is we've caused this erosion of the wetlands down in Louisiana, cutting off the sediment, also contributing our what we call subsidence because of oil and gas extraction. It causes the shoreline to sink, and then climate change with the rising sea levels. So what we've done up here has had consequences at the continental scale. The other thing about straightening the Missouri, it destabilized the outlets of the tributaries flowing to the Missouri. And so we get this creeping erosion up the tributaries, up the Soldier, the Boyer, the Booyer, I guess you call it here, Nishnabotna and others. And so destabilizing the Missouri also destabilized our inland streams. And so now this is what our streams look like, right? They're all down in these canyons. And if you didn't know any better and you drove across the countryside, you would think that's how they should look, right? If you didn't know any better. It's not. That's not how they're supposed to look. and we've replaced the perennial vegetation with annual species, 2 species, corn and soybeans. The sands and gravels are silted in. The water table is much lower now. And you know, when we look at a field, when we look at a farm field, some of the driest places in the field are right next to the stream. And that's because that stream has cut down so far. Now we have the pollution tolerant species, the carpet bullhead, and we still have the generalist species, the channel catfish. And so this stream on the right here is the South Skunk River, just southeast of Ames. So we did this on streams going to the Mississippi too. And we have thousands and thousands of miles of streams like this that we've straightened. And what I tell people, a lot of times it's a cold shower to people, but these streams, especially in western Iowa, they are not coming back, right? We have this joke we would use at work, you know, it's going to take another ice age to bring these streams back because we have channelized them and they've eroded downward, and there's really no hope that the landowners are going to allow us to remeander these streams. And so as a consequence, my opinion is it's unwise to spend conservation and water quality dollars on a lot of these streams because some of them truly are hopeless. The other thing we've done here during this time we were transforming the hydrology is we were transforming our farms. This is a very famous diagram from Iowa DNR from a 1970s pheasant study. This is a farm in Winnebago County in north central Iowa, and you can see the diversity of land uses on that farm. Corn, a little bit of soy, oats, alfalfa, swamps, woodlots. And then we fast forward to 1976, and it's almost all corn and soybeans. We still have a few oats left in 1976 and a little bit of hay, but that would be gone in the present day too. And so we've condensed our farms from multi-species systems down to only 2 species, right? And so I try to emphasize this to people. You know, where in nature do you see only 2 dominant species covering, you know, a huge percentage of the landscape? Nowhere. You don't see it anywhere. And so we're never going to get the environmental outcomes that we want when we've only got 2 species of vegetation out on the landscape. Now our farming systems look like this. So we have the clean rows of GMO crops right at the top. We have 25 million hogs here in Iowa. You can drive across Iowa and never see a hog, right? I crisscross Iowa all the time. I never see a hog. There's 25 million of them. They're all in these buildings up in on the horizon. And then we have the ethanol industry. And this all looks so clean, right? It looks so clean. And so if a casual observer, an out-of-stater drove through the state, they might say, wow, that just looks so nice. It's so nice and clean. But we know there's environmental consequences to this. And so the 2 big ones are connected with soil erosion and the nutrient pollution from nitrogen and phosphorus. We have hundreds and hundreds of impaired waters here in Iowa. You know, it's most evident in our lakes. You know, our lakes in the summertime are basically unusable except for Okoboji. Especially any constructed lake from, you know, Memorial Day to Labor Day looks like this. Lakes the public has paid for. You know, we have over 500 impaired river segments. We have 127 impaired lake segments. 80% of our monitored stream segments have been continuously impaired for at least 10 years. I mean, think about that. At least 80% of the monitored segments have been impaired continuously for 10 years. 43% of the lakes have been impaired continuously for at least 10 years. And we have over 60,000 miles of streams here in Iowa. We only have 15 stream segments that meet all their designated uses under the Clean Water Act. And I have had people in the legislature tell me this is no kidding, that, oh, the idea that our water is polluted here is a hoax. A hoax. Ken Rosenboom from Mascot County flat out told me that, and he's told other people that too.
Of course, if you're saying enough, people will believe it.
Yeah. So again, another point I try to emphasize to people is we have a problem of scale here. And so a lot of people in the public have this general impression that, well, if we could just get the farmers to do this, that, and the other thing, and put a Band-Aid over here on this 10 acres and a diaper over here on this 10 acres, that everything would be better. No, that's not going to be the case. We have a problem with scale. We have 70% of our land in corn and soy. That is a huge number for an area the size of the state of Iowa. We have 11,000 square miles of our state that's used just to produce corn for ethanol. So we have 99 counties. Imagine 20 of them, every square inch of 20 of them, growing corn to produce ethanol. That's what we have. We have the hogs. We have 4 million beef cattle, 80 million chickens. That's declined, I think everybody knows now. Probably down to about 50 million. 5 million turkeys, 4 million broiler chickens, 250,000 dairy cattle. And, you know, we have a problem of scale. That's what I really want to impress that upon you. Soil erosion is still very high. We see the industry, we hear the industry tell us a lot about how soil erosion has improved. Well, it did from about 1985 up until about 2000. And why did that happen? Well, because we had conservation compliance in the 1985 Farm Bill that required farmers to adopt a soil conservation plan if they wanted to participate in the federal commodity programs. It worked. We saw an immediate improvement in the clarity of streams in Iowa after we got conservation compliance. We really haven't seen much improvement since 2000, however, and we're still the worst state in the country for soil erosion. You can see the other ones there. Overall, the statewide average is about 5 tons per acre per year soil loss that we still have. All this has had consequence for our drinking water. We have 7,000 private wells in Iowa that have been contaminated with nitrate above 10 parts per million, the EPA standard. About 1/3 of our public water systems are vulnerable to nitrate. About 60 are actually removing it from the treatment train, in the treatment train, we call it. And 25% of us drink water that's been treated for nitrate reduction. So this has resulted in some action at the federal level of late, although who knows where this is going to end up now. Minnesota petitioned EPA to have their agencies more directly address this. Wisconsin, if anything, the groundwater in Wisconsin is worse than it is in Iowa. They have a bad nitrate problem. And then Iowa Environmental Council and 12 other environmental groups have petitioned EPA to protect drinking water in the driftless area of Iowa, which is this area, as you can see. And so groundwater there is particularly vulnerable. We have thin topsoils, and then we have the karst, fractured bedrock, fractured limestone bedrock that really enables pollutants to get from the surface down to the aquifer very quickly. We hear all about Des Moines in terms of nitrate, but the truth is this problem is mostly a burden for rural people. Okay, Des Moines has 700,000 people. They have the capacity to cope with this, okay, financially. You know, it's not a big deal for them in terms of their overall water bill to remove nitrate from their water. But if you're living in a town of 2,000 people and your well is contaminated with nitrate, that's a burden, right? That's a huge burden for that town to build a new treatment plant or to add treatment or, you know, hook up to rural water or whatever. And so it's very clever how the industry has been able to frame this as a Des Moines issue, when the city of Des Moines really, as I said, has the capacity to cope with this. And where it really hurts is rural Iowa. So we've known about the health consequences of all this stuff for a long time, but we hardly ever talk about it. And so, just as examples, 24 years ago, we know this paper published at the University of Iowa associating drinking water nitrate and bladder cancer in older women. 24 years ago, we've known that 24 years. 21 years now, we know that kids living near CAFOs have about double the risk of asthma. Known that for 21 years. 15 years now, nitrate in drinking water and thyroid cancer. And that's with that nitrate at 5 parts per million. That's half the EPA standard. 12 years, we know mothers consuming water with more than 5 parts per million of nitrate, twice as likely of giving a birth to a child with birth defects. 11 years, nitrate in drinking water in Iowa women and increased risk of ovarian cancer. That's at 3 parts per million. So I'd say almost everybody you know drinks water above 3 parts per million at some time. 9 years ago, 1.6 times the elevated risk of bladder cancer in postmenopausal women at above 5 parts per million. Also 9 years ago, living within 1 mile of a CAFO doubles your risk of having an antibiotic-resistant staph infection. This is Wisconsin 4 years ago. You see there between 110 and 300 cases of those cancers associated with drinking high nitrate water every year. So how many people here in Iowa drink water above 5 parts per million nitrate, which is the threshold for a lot of those studies? Almost 1 million people, right? 1 million people are drinking water at the level that is associated with adverse health effects in those studies. Then a year or so ago, we hear this story. We have the 2nd highest cancer rate in the United States. And we're the only state where the cancer rate is increasing. And one of those water systems that's removing nitrate is the one at the University of Iowa. So the University of Iowa has its own water treatment plant. And that's, in the old days, they used to train engineers in that treatment plant. So it provides treated drinking water from the Iowa River to campus and the hospital and all that. Well, the University of Iowa treatment plant a few years ago had to enact nitrate removal because they were violating the nitrate removal level, or nitrate level in the drinking water provided to campus. But then if you watch the football games, what do we do at the end of the first quarter? We all turn and wave to the kids in the hospital that have cancer, right? And do we ever think why some of those kids might be in the hospital, right? We don't. And then we do this. These are the drinking fountains at Kinnick Stadium. Who do we let sponsor the drinking fountains at Kinnick Stadium? The Iowa Corn Growers Association. At the same time, the university is having to buy nitrate removal for their drinking water treatment plant. And I say all the time, where is the outrage on this? Where is the outrage? It's sick. It's sick how this, sort of marketing and propaganda has intruded into our institutions. How have we let that happen? At the same time, our land-grant institution in Ames publishes a paper saying the optimum nitrogen fertilizer rate for corn needs to increase. Farmers need to apply more fertilizer to corn. Iowa State wrote up a nice little summary of this and released it as a news release, but they didn't tell anybody about this. That graph on the left shows corn yields at the economic optimum nitrogen rate. The blue line is corn in rotation with soy. The red line is continuous corn. And we can see that it's increasing. The yield is increasing as the rate of nitrogen is increasing. The graph on the right is the loss of nitrogen. Again, the red line is continuous corn. The blue line is corn grown in rotation with soybean. Well, look at these slopes, the percent change on the slopes. On the yields, we're getting a slope change of 1.2% in continuous corn, 1.4% corn and soy. But on losses, the slope is 2.8% continuous corn, 2.3% corn in rotation with soybean. So what we're saying here is, as we increase yields, the amount of pollution that we're producing is increasing faster than the amount of the yield increase. Do you think they tell us that? Do you think they tell the public that? No, they do not. And so we have this quest for more bushels, more bushels, more bushels all the time, right? And do we ever stop to think, what are the environmental consequences of this quest to squeeze ever more out of the landscape here? This is part of my work. What are the consequences of what we're doing here? Well, I say quite often, we pollute at the continental scale. And so when we look at Iowa, 31% of it drains to the Missouri, 69% drains to the upper Mississippi. Iowa has 3.3% of the land in the Missouri River Basin. So the Missouri River Basin's huge, right? It goes all the way to the Continental Divide. We have 3.3% of the land. We contribute 55% of the nitrogen in the Missouri River down at the confluence with the Mississippi. In the upper Mississippi, we have 21% of the land, and we contribute 45% of the nitrate. And then down at the Gulf, there are 4.5% of the land, 29% of the nitrate, and 15% of the phosphorus. And so if we're going to solve this stuff down in the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America with dead zone, we need to, get busy up here. And so the state's flagship water quality policy is the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, right? And so we had a science assessment to determine what practices farmers could use to reduce nutrient runoff from their streams. Those are eligible for cost share. And that's the traditional method of conservation in the United States. So what's the economics of that? Well, if a farmer goes out and buys some nitrogen today, it's going to cost about 50 cents a pound. Based on the practices eligible for cost share through the nutrient strategy, it's going to cost between $2 and $10 a pound to keep it out of the water. So let's say an average of $6. So the farmer buys it at 50 cents a pound, and the taxpayer pays $6 a pound to keep it out of the water. How is that going to work? It's never going to work. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy. And our political leaders lied to us about this. The average statewide nitrogen load in our streams is 600 million pounds. The goal of the nutrient strategy is a 45% reduction. 45% is 270 million pounds per year. Based on the cost of the BMPs, that's between 540 million and 2.7 billion a year, just for nitrogen, just to address the nitrogen, and not to completely get it out of the streams, to cut it by 45%. We are never going to have this amount of money. We're never going to have this amount of money. The entire budget from the state, from the University of Iowa, I think is about 250 million. Are we really going to have $2.7 billion a year to do this? One thing we need to remember too here is this isn't all about corn, and I love this graph here. The green line is the pounds of commercial nitrogen that were applied per corn acre in Iowa. The black line is the number of acres of soybeans we've had in Iowa. And so prior to 1960, we had diverse rotations where we had alfalfa and clovers that were fixing a lot of nitrogen. Almost every farmer had livestock, and so they had their own manure to use. When we got rid of the diverse rotations and brought in soybeans, which they fixed some nitrogen, but not enough and not very predictably, and we put animals in CAFOs and concentrated the manure into only a few hands, that meant that the vast majority of farmers needed commercial fertilizer, right? And so the use of commercial fertilizer went hand in hand with the introduction of soybeans as a second cash crop. And so we went to cash crop all the time. That had an effect, and it affected our water quality. And so what can we do, right? And so this is Matt Liebman. He's retired from Iowa State. I know him well. He spent his career studying these extended rotations. And so a 5-year rotation that includes corn, soy, oats, and 2 years of alfalfa versus just a 2-year rotation of corn and soy. The 5-year rotation nitrogen fertilizer use was 91% lower. Herbicide use was 97% lower. Even though we almost completely ended herbicide use, the weed biomass was similar in the two systems. Soybean health was better. Soil health was better. Tile nitrate, 57% lower in the extended rotation. So remember, the goal of the nutrient strategy, 45% reduction. Here we get 57% reduction, and it costs the taxpayer $0. Soil erosion cut in half, fossil fuel use reduced 60%, and the net returns to the farmer were similar. So revenue was lower, but the input costs were also lower. And so why don't we do this, right? Why don't we do this? Well, honestly, we lack infrastructure to transform the entire state to, this 5-crop rotation. So we would need policy, right? We need policy to create infrastructure that would allow us to do these diverse rotations. But big agribusiness, do you think they want farmers growing oats? No, they do not. Do you think they want them growing alfalfa? No, they do not. Corn is an expensive crop to grow. The seeds are expensive. The chemicals are expensive. The fertilizer is expensive. The crop insurance is expensive. Grain drying, grain hauling, all that stuff. It juices the system with cash, right? And so as a consequence, they want farmers growing these cash crops. The other thing I say all the time, we have to get rid of ethanol. If we're going to improve the environmental condition here in Iowa, we have got to get rid of ethanol. We hear all the time about how young farmers can't break in because of the price of land. And, an excuse we hear a lot is, the public land competes with us. Well, that's such a bunch of bull. What's competing, or what's causing the elevated land prices, is the renewable fuel standard. Okay, we created a guaranteed market for corn through the renewable fuel standard. Well, what we did then is we increased the value of the capital that's used to produce that corn. And so the value, or the price of an average acre of Iowa farmland has increased in lockstep with the amount of ethanol produced in this country. Think about this. The calories that we use for corn ethanol exceed the caloric requirements of every person in the United States. So more calories go into fuel ethanol than goes into our bodies, right? And then we're expected to believe this feed the world rhetoric. Ethanol also creates perversity in other places in the U.S. in agriculture. When I was growing up, the High Plains, that was wheat country, right? Well, now we grow corn there. We irrigate it with water from the Ogallala Aquifer. We're sucking it dry. It takes 6,000 years to naturally replenish the Ogallala Aquifer. Why? To irrigate corn for ethanol. There's ethanol plants in western Nebraska and western Kansas. How stupid is that? It's perverse. We hear about the Colorado River a lot and how the Colorado River is going dry, and Los Angeles and Phoenix and Las Vegas are going to run out of water. Half of the Colorado River is used to irrigate alfalfa. Half of it. Well, you know, that's a crop we could grow here without irrigation, right? It's a crop farmers used to grow here without irrigation. Why don't we grow it here? It's because of the renewable fuel standard, right? Because we've created this guaranteed market for corn. And so much of this alfalfa that's grown in the western states is shipped to Saudi Arabia and China. And so, you know, is that a sustainable system? Of course it is not. We hear the industry tell us that ethanol has greenhouse gas benefits. It doesn't. This very well-cited paper a couple years ago from the University of Wisconsin shows that ethanol blended gasoline actually increases greenhouse gas emissions by 24% over unblended gasoline. So I'm going to finish here. I don't know what time is it.
You're good.
Okay. Talking a little bit about what I'm doing now. And so I didn't get this in the introduction, but I'll get to it here. This is the driftless area, this donut hole in Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, where the landscape is dramatically different than the surrounding areas. And so we know that the driftless area is particularly vulnerable to pollution, but only about half the land up there is cropped because a lot of steep slopes, a lot of thin topsoil, and so we still have some forested areas there. And so what this graph shows here is nitrate loss on the y-axis and the row crop fraction on the x-axis. So 0.85, I mean 85% of the land in that watershed is cropped. Each of those dots is a watershed. And so we see how nitrate export in these watersheds is pretty linearly related to how much of the land is cropped. Everybody see that? But then we look at these three dots up here. Those are all up in the driftless area. So that's the Turkey River, the Upper Iowa River, and the Yellow River. And so we have very high nitrate loss in those watersheds with a very small fraction of the land being in crop production. And so that's the geological vulnerabilities up there. As I said, thin topsoil, fractured limestone bedrock, the nitrogen in the soil gets down to the bedrock very rapidly, gets down through the bedrock, which commingles, those aquifers commingle with the streams, and so we have a lot of nitrate loss in the driftless. We really don't have that many CAFOs up there, and so we have about 8,000 CAFOs in Iowa that we really don't have too many up there yet. But we see, especially here in Northwest Iowa, you know, things are pretty filled up, right? And so farmers have a hard time finding fields to apply their manure, especially if you want to open a new one. If you want a new operation, you're going to have a hard time finding fields to put your manure. And so consequently, they're looking at Northeast Iowa as a place to expand. Only about half the area is cropped, and so they can get some deals on land, and so that's happening. And the one we hear about a lot is Bloody Run Creek, which is just near McGregor, Iowa, and Marquette, Iowa. And this is going on 8 years ago now. What was initially called Walls Energy wanted to open up an 11,000 head beef cattle feedlot there. manure was going to be processed in a manure digester. And there were two separate investor groups here. One were the cattle guys, one were the energy guys. The energy guys were going to sell natural gas from the digester to a utility company. Well, the digester thing fell apart. But anyway, DNR permitted it initially as an industrial wastewater treatment facility because of the digester. Almost from the beginning, they were having problems. They had soil run off into the stream and pollute the stream twice. DNR fined them twice for $10,000. This is 2018. 2019, the partnership between the digester and the cattle people fell apart. There was a lawsuit. But anyway, now they don't have the digester, and now they need a nutrient management plan for all these cattle. And remember, there's not a lot of crop fields up there, and so it's harder to find places to put the manure than it is here. Well, at that time, I wrote a piece on my university website about this. It was titled "On Brothels and Cathedrals." Of course, the brothel being Supreme Walls Energy, Supreme Beef, and the cathedral being the stream. It's a chapter in my book. In 2020, Sierra Club, Trout Unlimited, and some citizens group formed a Save Bloody Run committee. The university was monitoring Bloody Run. This was the program I managed at the university, was the Water Quality Sensor Network. We had 2 water quality sensors in Bloody Run Creek, measuring nitrate and other parameters continuously. One was at the headwaters of Bloody Run, up there near the town of Monona, and then the other one was down here where the stream goes under a bridge on Highway 18. So that was the program I managed. Then in May of 21, we hear that Iowa Senator Dan Zumbaugh leaned on the DNR director to get the permitting process expedited for the now needed nutrient management plan. And here's where we find out that the guy that owns the cattle operation is Zumbaugh's son-in-law. Okay? So he's in the legislature. His son-in-law owns this 11,000 head cattle operation, and he's calling DNR to get the plans approved. And so, not surprisingly, DNR approved the nutrient management plan. And so, Sierra Club and the Save Bloody Run committee, they sued to say this wasn't right. They didn't consider everything they should. The thing never should have been approved. And in January 2022, the Save Bloody Run people filed a ethics complaint against Zumbaugh. And, you know, I might add, here's some of his contributors to his political fund. And so, you know, ultimately Zumbaugh was let off. You know, the complaint didn't amount to anything. There were Democrats on the committee that voted to, you know, not reprimand him.
What?
And,
That's horrible.
yeah, Rob Hogue was one of them. You know, the great environmentalist, Rob Hogue, was one of them that said, well, he didn't really do anything that bad, and so they let him off. Well, then in April of 23, I'm told by my boss that a couple people in the legislature have come to the university lobbyist and said that they need to do something about me.
About you.
Yes, and otherwise some funding for the programs there in the engineering college would be in peril.
Blackmail.
And one of them was Dan Zumbaugh. One was Dan Zumbaugh and one was Tom Shipley. So that same month, Zumbaugh sponsors a bill that ends up defunding the Water Quality Sensor Network. And at this point, you know, I just thought, you know, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And I talked to my financial advisor and asked him if I had enough to retire, and he had to tell me 3 times yes, but the 3rd time I decided I would retire. And so this was widely reported in the media at the time. And ultimately, a judge overturned the approval of the nutrient management plan, right? So the Save Bloody Run Committee and the Sierra Club and Trout Unlimited won, a temporary victory there. The judge did overturn the manure management plan that same month. And so then DNR sent it back to Supreme Beef, that's what it's called now, and to create a new plan. And this guy's wife creates a new nutrient management plan for them. Mike Sexton, who's the representative, I think he's for Dodge area, which ultimately gets approved. And so in February of 24, a new sort of strategy was developed by the Save Bloody Run people, and that was to challenge the renewal of the water use permit. And so the operation has 2 wells. They can draw 25,000 gallons a day from each to water the cattle. And so by this time, the water use permit had expired, and in Iowa code, it says that DNR must consider the environmental outcomes that may result from the water use permit. That's right in Iowa code. DNR has never done that, ever. And so the argument here was that granting the water use permit renewal will ultimately cause pollution to result from the cattle that are drinking the water. In November, the judge agreed. The administrative law judge agreed, said that DNR should follow Iowa code, and sent it back to DNR in what was a non-binding decision. So about this same time, this group, the Driftless Water Defenders, was formed. An attorney in Iowa City, Jim LaRue, is kind of the brain. It's his brainchild, and this all was happening as I was going into retirement, and he asked me if I would be the president of this group, and so I am. I agreed, and that's what I do now. I am president of the Driftless Water Defenders. Our mission is the 3 words: educate, advocate, and litigate. And so yes, we're going to sue some people. We think it's time. We think it's time to get more aggressive here and try to get some wins. Anyway, in January, we petitioned DNR to reject the Supreme Beef water use permit. They did not. They went ahead and issued it, and we've appealed that, and we're awaiting a decision on that. And so there's that. A couple other things we have in the works. We are trying to get in front of this manure digester in Winnebago County. There's an 850 head dairy operation there that wants to put in 2 digesters and expand to about 10,000 dairy cattle. And so the digesters will enable them to do that. We're opposing that. And then we're also suing the Agristar plant in Postville, the meat processing plant there. They have been repeatedly violating their NPDES permit over and over and over again, month after month, year after year, and DNR will do nothing. DNR will not address it. The Yellow River that they discharge to, it's a trout stream, it's impaired. DNR will not address this. And so this is the 3rd thing that we have in the works here. This is the slide Chuck was talking about, and maybe I'll go back to this in a second. So I'll end this with this map. This is something I did a number of years ago. These are all the Huck 8 watersheds in Iowa. There's 56 of them. The average area is 1,000 square miles. I looked at the livestock populations in all these watersheds. I converted the fecal waste from that livestock to a human equivalent, right? So like a hog is worth about 4 people. And then I just, looked for a place name that matched up with that population, dropped it into that map. And I just never could have imagined that this would be the most significant thing I would do in the course of my career. But it does sort of crystallize the situation. Can we get the environmental outcomes that we want when we're producing at this scale? We ought to be able to determine how much production can take place in these watersheds and still get good or adequate water quality. We know how to do that. We can do that. We know how to do that. But no one will let us do it. And so that's my last slide there, and I'll take questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, something is really wrong at the legislature when they make a criminal act to go out and photograph a corporate feedlot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Is anybody advocating getting rid of all subsidies, crop subsidies? Couldn't we address a lot of this if we just got rid of the subsidies?
So the question is, could we get rid of farm subsidies and does that affect environmental outcomes? Well, almost every Western democracy subsidizes their agriculture in some way. And so is it a reasonable idea that we would get rid of all of it? It probably is not. What we could do, though, is more aggressively tie public money to conservation. And so, as I said, we had conservation compliance in the 1985 Farm Bill. It worked. Well, there's no reason we couldn't do the same thing for all sorts of other stuff. With nutrient pollution, air pollution from CAFOs, whatever it might be, pesticide pollution. There ought to be some accountability for this public money from a conservation and environmental perspective. That seems like a possible thing we could do as a civil society, right? But of course the farm interests are very much against that. I do think this country could take a long, hard look at our agricultural production and what does it make sense to produce at what level.
Yeah.
So, we overproduce all sorts of stuff. Why are we doing that? It's not good for us, and it's not good for the farmers in many cases. Yes, sir.
What's wrong with the anaerobic digesters? Haven't they improved in the 8 years since Supreme filed up that operation? We've got them up in Northwest Iowa at the dairies up there.
So I edited a textbook on anaerobic digesters, and so I've always been sort of agnostic about it as a technology. There are problems, we have had some people get killed working on them, but should that be a reason why we should not do them? I don't think so. The problem I have with them is they're enabling livestock operations to expand. And so digesting the manure does not lower the nutrient content. That's an important point here. And so just because you take it through the digester doesn't mean it has less nitrogen and phosphorus. It is easier to handle, for the farmer to handle. And so that enables the farmer to bring in more animals. Well, of course, that's what they want to do to pay for the digester. And so sort of ground zero for digesters is Door County in Wisconsin. And that's the thumb of Wisconsin that sticks out into Lake Michigan. Digesters have been widely adopted up there. The water is worse than ever in Green Bay. You look at Green Bay in the summer and it looks like these lakes I showed in my slides. Why? Because all these dairies have expanded after they got the digester. And it doesn't reduce the nutrient content, so in effect, they increase the pollution. So that's the issue I have.
Would you say that the Iowa DNR is afraid to take action because the legislators are holding the purse strings and could cut their funding if they do? And is there anything that could be done to overcome that?
I
So, of
think-
course-
Yeah, just as background, I think they're accountable to the governor. And if the governor tells them for whatever reason not to do something, and so they may, at that level, say, this is not a priority for us, therefore don't fight or do fight on that issue.
I think the state has always funded DNR at a level that would keep EPA from coming in and taking primacy. That's, I think, been the overall strategy here, going back to the days when DNR was formed, essentially, by Branson. And so if DNR isn't doing their job correctly, then EPA has a right to come in and take away primacy on enforcement from them. I mean, now, we're in a whole new paradigm now, right? And so that's the level of funding that they've got.
I don't even know how to ask this question, but 3/8 of a cent. That's all
Yeah.
Is there a bill, or did that pass, or did it get?
So I think
where's
that's
that at?
dead, right? So in 2010, we voted for the Natural Resources Trust Fund. It was never funded. If the sales tax was ever raised, 3/8 of the 1 cent would go to fund that trust fund. Then, it's been discussed almost every year since then, going back to 2010. It's never been funded. This year, a bill was introduced to get rid of the trust fund completely. And my take on it is Republicans want to do property tax relief by raising the sales tax, but they don't want any of that sales tax money going to environmental stuff.
Right.
And so the solution there is just get rid of the trust fund.
Weren't they gonna try and make it that they were still gonna have that percentage, but it wasn't gonna go to natural resources?
Yeah, they want to
It was gonna go
redo the
something
formula.
else.
They want to redo the formula. So the question was, were they going to change the formula? Yes, they have talked about changing the formula, essentially, so more of the money would go to farmers and less to trails and parks and whatever.
The formula has always been in code, not in the Constitution, so that was always something that the legislature could do if they wanted, and certainly things have changed in 15 years. Chris talked about, there's no bill currently introduced, I was the last one to do it, that says raise the sales tax 3/8 cents, we're gonna do what the voters wanted. There's nobody filed that bill this year. The one that was filed said, we're gonna get rid of, it was a constitutional amendment, you'd all have to vote on it, we're gonna get rid of that fund and create a property tax relief fund, and the 3/8 cents will go into that. Well, guess what, we already have a bunch of money we can use for property tax relief, so we're not using it. My take on that was, bring it on.
Yeah, me too.
Let's
We talked
ask the
about
voters to make that choice. I bet you it would pass again.
Because the voters passed it before.
So we've 63% in 2010. Lynn County had their own resolution in 2016, passed with 71%. Polk County had a resolution similar, I think in 2020, passed 83%. And so, look, the momentum is going in the other way, and I totally agree that the environmental side of things should be willing to take some risks here and get that thing on the ballot again and shove it down their throat.
Yeah.
I think that's the approach we should take.
In the meantime, I had a conversation with somebody who now has a bicycle coalition, so trails is a big part of that fund as well. Because of what we've seen in other counties, what if we were to find several counties, Woodbury and Dubuque, 2 to start with, maybe one other in the middle of the state, urban, and then find 3 rural counties, say 6 counties, committing to all go on the ballot at the same time, say in 2026, to do exactly, create our own conservation bond, and then do a statewide effort to get all 6 of those passed. More economical, right? You know, you don't have to invest in your own outreach capacity because you're working together, and show that way that there's broad public support and it would actually fund something in those counties.
Wow.
And I think there'd be some interest in Dubuque if there were other counties that wanted to go together.
How do you maintain your
You mentioned,
Go ahead.
you mentioned a 5-year rotation in some of your data. How, I know there's farmers out there that want to do the right thing. How do they make that happen when the inputs are so close and Big Ag is basically leading them into indentured servitude and they can't lose the profit? So how do we make that happen? What do you think?
So I hear that a lot, that farmers would like to do something different, but they can't, and they're chained to the present system. And so how do we make that happen? Well, we need policy, obviously. And so there's a big opportunity right now. Right now there's a huge opportunity, and it's called the tariff. And so 20 miles from where I live is the largest oat processing facility in the world. It uses no oats from Iowa. They bring in all their oats from Canada by rail. Okay? And they won't use Iowa oats. Well, all of a sudden we have an opportunity now where these imported oats from Canada are 25% more expensive. But we need policy. We have policy that requires every gas station in the state of Iowa to sell E15 blended gasoline. Why can we not have policy that incentivizes the use of crops like oats for the processors that we have in our state that would use them? And so we need legislators to get creative about this sort of thing. This is, I think about this. We have this behemoth of the ethanol industry. The ethanol industry exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's policy. There's no reason we can't think of other things that would incentivize production of other crops and indemnify farmers over a transition period to get them to a new place. I am not against using public money, to get things that we want from farmers. I'm not against it. Yes, I'm for regulating. I'm very honest about that. But I think it's reasonable to use public money to create the economic and built infrastructure to transition them to other systems that would produce better outcomes for all of us, right? And not just the Koch brothers, and not just Cargill, and not just ADM, and not just Bayer, right? We're the people that have to live here and cope with the pollution. It's not some executive at Cargill sitting in Minneapolis.
The other thing we have as an issue related to that is the average age of the Iowa farmer. Most are at an age where they don't want to learn to do anything different or new. And getting the younger folks back into it, given the cost of land and capital, to put them in a position of being their own decision makers. If you have to rent the land, you're not going to get permission. You're not going to spend a lot of money improving somebody else's land. So that whole question of what is the next generation of agricultural producers going to look like and who they are. And I want to take that as an opportunity, Chris, to note that we maybe have a total of 3 or 5 people in this room under the age of 30.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had any questions.
So let me address that first. So 60% of our land here is rented, right? That's where you start. We need land reform. We have people sitting in offices in Chicago and Omaha and Des Moines and Minneapolis. There are landowners here that are renting the land. They're not conservationists, right? We need to tax the hell out of that. We need to regulate the pollution from that land. We need to require cover crops on that land. All these sorts of things that would get them to divest themselves of the land. Make it painful for them to own the land, right? Then they sell it. You open up land for younger farmers that are open-minded and want to do different things. They have the energy to do it. They have the physical conditioning to do it. All these sustainable systems, almost all of them, involve cattle in some way. Almost every idea for sustainable agriculture requires cattle. Well, if you're 75 years old, you're not going to want cattle, right? And so we can do things through policy to get the outcomes that we want. It's just all the creativity is just big-footed by corporate agriculture.
was gonna answer not really answer it, but your question about doing something different. And there was a program this past week on Market to Market. I don't know if you watched it, but I did a little bit of it. And this was happening. A young farmer said, somebody came to propose this different idea of putting a small amount of his property to see how this goes, all these rotation type crops that you had mentioned before with the alfalfa and oats, etc. And, it took a few years, but he was seeing profit with less work, soil that was being regenerated and healthier, and he was very pleased with the program and how it was going. And he says, he did get new equipment for this in order to, I don't really understand what mechanics of it too well, but he said with another farmer, they could share this equipment, this new equipment, to plant these different crops. And it was interesting, I thought, because it is being done. It was a younger, farmer that had experience,
Sure.
that had some land, and he thought it was going quite well.
So that's what we need, but we need sort of a roadmap here. And we have 85,000 farmers in Iowa, but we really only have about 20,000 that control probably 60% of the land. And so, and those 20,000, they are not going to change. Okay? If you're farming 5,000 acres, 50 miles to the east of here, which there's a lot of people doing that, you do not have time to fart around with cover crops. You do not have time to fart around with oats and alfalfa. You got to get those seeds in the ground, right? And so they are not going to change. And so we need some sort of land reform here that's going to create a roadmap that allows us to do different things.
This guy, this young farmer, was a third generation farmer. So yes, he did have that
We
land.
have time, maybe one or two.
That's
more
young
questions.
ladies that are here.
I actually different. I worked for Green Iowa AmeriCorps at the University of Northern Iowa, and they've kind of committed completely to like sustainability through their agriculture programs and stuff. And then you kind of mentioned AIMS, and when I talked to one of the directors at the environmental departments, he said that they're kind of backed by a lot of funding through these pesticide companies and seed companies. And they're teaching these young farmers unsustainable practices. And he said it's like a huge problem. And I just, as someone who's a young advocate, young environmentalist, and trying to get people to talk and like talk about what is actually right, and not just putting money in people who are in rich pockets, And
Look, a big reason we have this pollution, and I'll say this, and I'm not afraid to say it, is Iowa State University. I mean, that's just it, long and short.
And how do we hold these people accountable? How do we start calling them out? Because
Well, I think I'm trying.
I know you have.
I would say organize a group and start registering on these bills and put in your comments why and the questions that you have.
From the economic purposes or the amount of effort and work people want to do, I think some states also use buffer zones, like a wilderness buffer zone between the watershed to the river. What are your thoughts on that?
So the question is about buffers, and do other states do it? Could we do it here? Minnesota has a law that there has to be 50 feet of a buffer along all perennial streams. Okay, this has been talked about a lot in Iowa, and we've had some proposals of 30 feet. The division of, or not the division, the soil and water conservation districts have proposed 30 feet. There's a process for adopting something like this, it's got to get through IDALS, which is Mike Nagg, the Department of Agriculture, then it goes to the legislature. It's been shot down immediately by Nagg and IDALS. They don't want to do that. They say, no, it's all voluntary. We're not requiring anybody to do anything. On the buffers, this is what I tell people. If we cannot protect the riparian areas of these streams, it truly is hopeless. Okay? If we cannot even do that, that is the most basic thing in conservation, is to have some ecological integrity in the riparian areas. If we can't do that, it is hopeless. And this is why it's frustrating to me on the nutrient strategy, where we hear these goals of having cover crops on 50% of the crop acres. That's the hard stuff, right? That's the hard stuff. We can't even do the easy stuff, like buffer our streams or get farmers to apply nutrients at what the agronomic needs are, right? We can't even do the easy stuff, and that's where I say we need laws. We need regulation. I'm not against providing taxpayer money to farmers to get these environmental outcomes that we want, but we need laws.
You've almost inspired me to go home and burn my Cyclone sweatshirt.
Yeah.
That's why.
Good.